It's easiest to begin learning to count rhythm in 4/4 time, so the examples in this lesson will be dedicated to this time signature only. We will start simple by only counting what are called downbeats and upbeats. Every measure begins with a downbeat on beat 1. The downbeats that follow are on 2, 3, and 4. After beat 4, you move to the next measure and start on 1 again, and the cycle repeats for every measure. So downbeats are the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Upbeats occur exactly halfway between each downbeat. They are symbolized by a plus sign and are pronounced and. So to count a full measure using downbeats and upbeats, you would say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. When we talk about a note's durational value, or simply duration, we are describing how long the note rings relative to the steady counting of downbeats and upbeats. In other words, a note's duration is always described in terms of beats and/or portions of a beat. I want to take a moment to add 2 additional side notes that will pertain to this entire lesson. First, know that we will learn the note names on the staff in the next lesson. So for now, just focus on the durational values of each note throughout this lesson. Second, understand that although tab is a great way to learn where the notes are found on the fingerboard, it does not show you the durational value of each note. So when you're reading tab to find each note's placement on the ukulele, you will still need to read the standard notation to a certain level in order to know each tab denotes durational value. Okay, moving on. The single biggest note value we can write in 4/4 is called a whole note. It's called a whole note because it has a durational value of 4 beats, meaning it rings or sustains through the whole measure. Take a look at these 4 measures of whole notes on the staff. Notice that each measure is completely filled by a single whole note. That's because each whole note's durational value of 4 beats leaves no room for anything more. Whole notes can only begin on beat 1. So when counting them, we start with 1 and continue with an even count of and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Each number is called a downbeat, and each and, represented by the plus sign, is called an upbeat. After the upbeat of beat 4, a new measure begins on the downbeat of beat 1 again. Here we can see our example of whole notes on the staff again, but now with the counting illustrated. Listen to what this sounds like and notice that each whole note begins on beat 1 and then rings through the remaining beats of each measure. Also notice that the counting maintains a very even pace throughout the 4 measures. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If we split a whole note into 2 equal parts, the resulting 2-beat durational value of each note is called a half note. Half notes are similar in appearance to whole notes in that they have a hollow note head, but differ in that they have a stem attached to their note head. This stem can extend upwards from the right side of the note head or downwards from the left side of the note head, which is determined by the note's placement on the staff. The stem's direction does not change the sound of the note in any way. The general rule is if the note is on the middle line of the staff or higher, the stem will extend down. If the note is on the middle line or lower, the stem will extend up. The middle line could be up or down. Here you can see what half notes look like on the staff. Notice the stem directions change in the last measure as the notes cross the middle line threshold on the staff. Half notes can begin on beat 1, beat 2, or beat 3 in 4/4 time. A half note beginning on beat 1 sustains for 2 beats through the count 1 and 2 and. A half note beginning on beat 2 also has a 2-beat duration, but rings through the count 2 and 3 and. And a half note beginning on beat 3 rings through the 2-beat count of 3 and 4 and. Looking at the staff again, you can see how the counting plays out when each measure is filled with half notes. Each measure commences with a half note on the downbeat of beat 1, which then sustains through beats 1 and 2 until the downbeat of beat 3, at which point another half note commences, and then sustains through beats 3 and 4. Count along as you hear the example played through. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Splitting each half note into two equal parts, the resulting one beat durational value of each note is called a quarter note. Quarter notes have a solid note head with a stem, and their stems follow the same rules as half notes regarding direction when they are placed on the staff. Here you can see what quarter notes look like on the staff. Each one represents a single beat, so there are 4 of them in each measure. If you place a quarter note on the downbeat of beat 1, its duration would last for the count of 1 and. Starting on the downbeat of beat 2, a quarter note's duration would last for the count of 2 and. And on beat 3, the count would be 3 and. And commencing on beat 4, the count would be 4 and. Here you can see the counting for the previous example. Count along as you listen to it played on the ukulele. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Splitting each quarter note into two equal parts, the resulting half beat durational value of each note is called an eighth note. Eighth notes have a solid note head, a stem, and a flag. The stems obey the established rule when placed on the staff. However, it is important to note that the flag will always extend to the right of the stem, no matter the stem's direction. Here you can see what eighth notes look like when placed on the staff. Each eighth note represents 1/2 of a beat, thus it takes 8 eighth notes to fill a complete measure in 4/4 time. If you were to place an eighth note on the downbeat of beat 1, it would only take up the first half of the beat up until the and of beat 1. At which point another eighth note could be placed to complete beat 1 by adding its second half. This would ring until beat 2, at which point another eighth note could be placed on the downbeat, taking us to the and of beat 2, where another eighth note would be needed to round out beat 2. This pattern would follow through for the rest of the measure, picking up on the downbeat of beat 3, then the and of beat 3, to the downbeat of beat 4, and finally the and of beat 4. You can visualize this by making a row of evenly spaced downbeats and upbeats in text, such as this example here. You can then place a single eighth note above any of the counting symbols to visualize each eighth note's duration within the measure, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You can also visualize the counting by lining up the count with the notes on the staff. Start on beat 1 and the count is the same as before. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. These examples have shown individual eighth notes, each with their own stem and flag. It is not common to see extended runs of eighth notes written in this way. Instead, eighth notes are usually beamed together. Here you can see 2 eighth notes that have been beamed together. The beam takes the place of the flag. By combining the flags into a beam, it is now very easy to see a single beat unit. Beams can also be used on downstemmed eighth notes. The individual flags have been combined into a single beam that connects each eighth note's stem. Here you can see what beamed eighth notes look like on the staff. Notice how easy it now is to see each measure's 4 beats. Each 2-note grouping represents 1 beat. Compare the exact same passage without beams, and notice how much harder it is to find a downbeat somewhere in the middle of the measure. You probably have to count the eighth notes from beat 1 in order to find another downbeat somewhere in the middle. Now look at the beamed example again, and notice how easy it is to find any downbeat. These two examples sound exactly the same, only their legibility differs in that the beamed example is much easier to read. To prove their metric equivalence, let's plug in the counting like before, starting on the downbeat of beat 1. As you can see, each measure adds up to 4 beats. Sometimes you may see eighth notes beamed in larger groups, such as 4-note groupings. This is true for downstemmed notes too. When placed on the staff, once again, the counting does not change. Only the appearance and readability does. Notice again how easy it is to find downbeats and upbeats visually when using beams. Beams can also appear in asymmetrical groupings, such as this example of 3 plus 3 plus 2. This example shows 2 measures of asymmetrically beamed eighth notes. Notice how the counting still plays out perfectly. So why would one choose to write eighth notes asymmetrically rather than evenly in groups of 2 or 4? Grouping may be used to show the intended rhythmic inflection of the music. For example, grouped in 2s, each downbeat is expected to have emphasis, whereas grouped in 4s, downbeats 1 and 3 receive more emphasis. And asymmetrically in a 3-3-2 grouping, the downbeat of beat 1, upbeat of beat 2, and downbeat of 4 receive more emphasis. So beaming can show where accents occur, and thus visually represent how the sound is intended to be interpreted. Let's listen to each of these examples beamed in 2, 4, or asymmetrically would sound on the ukulele. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now grouped in 4s. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And now asymmetrically 3-3-2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The last durational value that we're going to look at in this video is the 16th note. Splitting each eighth note into 2 equal parts, the resulting quarter beat durational value of each note is called a 16th note. 16th notes have a solid note head, a stem, and a double flag. The stems and flags obey the established rules when placed on the staff. Here's a 2-measure example of individual 16th notes. As you can see, visually, it's a mess. The example is very difficult to read, even though it's accurate. Of course, 16th notes can also be beamed into groups. 16th notes use double beams to represent the double flags found on the individual notes. When beamed in groups of 4, each grouping represents a single beat. The counting requires more syllables, too. To count 16th notes, start on a downbeat and then count E and A. Notice that the and is still exactly halfway through the beat, just like with the eighth notes. Written on the staff, beamed 16th notes are much cleaner in appearance when compared to non-beamed individual 16th notes. Notice how much easier it is to visually find each downbeat once the notes are beamed. 16th notes can be easily visualized against a counting row, just like eighth notes. To count 16th notes through the measure, say 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A. 16th notes can also be beamed in combinations with eighth notes. This example shows an eighth note beamed to 2 16th notes. Notice the 1 E and A count, and that the E is placed in parentheses. This is because the eighth note rings through that part of the count. It's there, but nothing is happening on that part of the beat aside from the eighth notes sustaining through it. Another common beaming combo is 2 16th notes beamed to an eighth note. Here the is in parentheses, again because of the eighth note's sustain through that portion of the beat. Finally, here's a common beaming combo where the eighth note is between 2 16th notes. The and is in parentheses because of the eighth note's placement. Each of these last 3 examples should be practiced by counting them aloud while tapping a steady quarter note beat. So there's your explanation for how to count rhythm in 4/4 time with whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.